Okay, folks, this is Module 6 in Managerial Accounting, and it is Chapter 8 in the book. And this chapter, it's a big topic. You're going to find that the homework is a lot. It's conceptually, easy to get your head around, but the analytic procedures are pretty intense, but that's why we do it late in the semester. And the way that we're going to do this is this first video I'm going to run through, with a voiceover on my iPad with my pen making notes, and it's going to be pretty conceptual, and then the remainder of the videos are going to be all side-by-side Excel videos basically showing you how to work these problems. So let's get going. The first thing I want to note is this is called short-term or short-run decision-making. And I want to kind of be clear about what that means. They're using this term in order to distinguish it from long-term, right, as opposed to long-term decision-making. So basically, the difference between the short-term and the long-term in economic terms is that in the short term, there is such a thing as constrained resources. There's such a thing as fixed costs. In the long term, there's no fixed costs, right? You can close factories, you can buy new factories, you can buy new fixed capacity, right? And so that's why we are talking about short-run decision-making. So these are tactical decision-making as opposed to strategic, right? So tactical means what are we going to do now? Strategic means what are we going to do in the long term, right? So that's the first thing. And then the other thing is that we're going to talk a lot here about what costs are relevant. What costs should we actually consider when we're making some of these decisions? And so, this first video here is going to go into a fair amount of detail about explaining what we mean by relevant costs, because not all costs are relevant to your decision making. So let's move along. Okay, so every one of these chapters has a set of learning objectives that goes along with it, and typically I don't go through this slide in my videos because, it becomes clear, but I do kind of want to give you an overview because this is such a big chapter. So the first thing we're going to do here is to talk about what the decision model is. That's what we're going to be doing in this first video, right? And it's very conceptual, right? So this first video and the first objective is very conceptual. And then we're going to be doing applications, and this is going to be in Excel, right? So I don't know how many videos it's going to take to do that. I haven't done them yet, probably 3 or 4. And these business situations that we're going to be making decisions about are things like, whether we want to outsource or versus make in-house, right? Things like that. How do you decide how to acquire the things that you need in order to be able to make a profit? So we're going to go into great detail about how to actually make those decisions. This is, very, very important management topic. And then we are going to be looking at a product mix choice and optimizing product mix with one constraint. We'll talk about what constraints are. This, again, gets to economics. Economics is a constrained optimization at all time, and we want to optimize our product mix. This is something that you're going to see in your strategy class without a doubt. And then we're going to look at cost plus pricing. So that is what we're doing in this chapter. And so the first video, like I said, is going to be just about the model, how we're supposed to think, how we need to think when we're making decisions. Okay, so first I want to emphasize what short-run decision-making actually is. Basically, what you have to do is lay out your alternatives, right? You have choice 1, choice 2, choice 3, and it's an immediate or limited time decision, right? These are tactical decisions because they have an immediate time frame in mind, as opposed to, right, it's either tactical or strategic. Tactical is what you do, strategy is who you are, right? So that there's a difference there. One of the examples that we'll look at is accepting special orders at less than the normal selling price to use your idle capacity. That would be one of the decisions that you as a general manager could potentially be faced with. Right? This is not an accounting decision. It's not an accountant's decision. It's a general manager's decision. And that's why, of course, we have you take these classes, is so that you are equipped to make these kinds of decisions. And the thing to keep in mind, though, this is key, right? Short-run decisions often have long-run consequences. And, if you look at potentially like the make or buy, if you decide to outsource some of your components, what happens if you do that? What happens if you do that? What happens if you lose the capacity and the institutional knowledge of how to make these components that you're outsourcing? You'll have profit potentially increase, but potentially at a long-term cost. And so, it's really important to think about not just the short-run profit maximization issues, but also long-run potential longer-term effects of these short-term decisions. So there are 6 steps in this decision framework, and these steps actually are pretty much universal for any kind of decision making. When you step back and get more analytical about it, you may find, if you really like this stuff and this really resonates with you, that you find that it improves just your life to become a more decisive person. If you recognize that the process for making a decision can be broken down into straightforward steps, in a business context, which is what we will obviously be discussing, these are things like deciding whether and how to create some additional capacity. Basically, make an addition to a production shop. But these are the same steps that you make for any decisions in your life. Do you need more education? Would your life be enhanced by that? As in my life, do I need more space in my living space? So the first thing, of course, is just to define what the problem is. And then, you just sort of throw a bunch of information to it, right? You don't try to organize it. You just consider, right, the different parameters of the problem, including, in this case, for production capacity, the number of workers you might need, why you need it, what you actually intend to do. But really, all of these, right, as you're thinking about things, they all go into the question of how to acquire the additional capacity, right? So you recognize a need, you think about all the different pieces that go into it, and then you use all this sort of brainstorming to figure out how to actually acquire that capacity. Okay, so as I said, there are 6 steps in this procedure of making decisions, short-run decisions, and the second step is to look at your alternatives. Just list them and think about all your different possible solutions. Some of them are just not feasible, either because they're too risky, or they just don't make any sense, or they cost too much. But one of the best things you can do as a general manager, and also, again, I keep thinking about this in terms of our personal lives, when you have a decision to make, a short-run decision to make, you want to make sure that it actually fits in with the overall strategy by looking at, evaluating risk and the other considerations relative to the stage that you are in your company's life. Okay, the third step here then, step 3 of 6, is to lay out all the costs and the benefits. Costs are easy to quantify. Benefits are difficult to quantify. And that's just the nature of life, right? It's easy to see how much things cost. It's not so easy to see with any degree of certainty how much you're going to benefit from the investment. But the important thing, though, and we'll talk about this in more length, is that you can eliminate at this point. You need to be careful about only including about excluding irrelevant costs as you begin looking at the costs and benefits. And the thing to remember is that if you focus only on relevant costs and benefits, then you minimize the amount of data and the amount of analysis that you need to do. And again, this will become more clear as we go on in this presentation. And then the next thing you need to do is, once you have identified what the cost elements are that you're considering, right? So step 3 was identify the costs. Identify the costs and benefits that you're going to be considering for the alternatives. Then you go out and you do research on what those costs actually are. Okay, so first you figure out what you're gonna look at, what costs and what benefits that you're gonna look at, and then you go out and you actually get the numbers, right? You get the estimates for the costs and the benefits. And then the difference is what we care about. The difference is what we care about. We want to look at the difference between the total costs of the two alternatives. Which is going to cost you less in the short term, which is going to cost you more in the short term, but benefit you more in the long term. And then the other thing, and this is kind of an aside, right? If you are going to look at irrelevant costs, and again, we'll talk about that more later, it's just important to compare apples to apples, right? If you're going to include irrelevant costs in one alternative, you need to compare them to all the other alternatives as well. This is apples to apples comparison. Right, okay. Now, this one is really important, right? Once you've laid out all the dollars and cents, right, after you've got estimates for the actual, monetary costs of things, then you want to step back and look at qualitative issues as well. So what do we mean by qualitative factors? Those are things that it's not so easy to put a dollar sign on, but that are still important. For instance, if we're looking at offshoring, sending our production to some other country, maybe there's huge savings for doing that, but maybe consumer pressure or political pressure would make that option less attractive. Product safety, again, they're putting that into a qualitative factor, but we know at Keene State, with our huge and very well regarded safety program, that issues around product safety are actually quantifiable. I would say that those issues sort of straddle the line between qualitative quantitative factor, and they are a very important element of tactical decision making. Another one, which is not included on these slides, but that I would be very clear of, is sustainability issues. Is it doing the right thing for the environment, for your stakeholders, for the people and the planet, not just for profit, right? So people and planet, how is that affecting them? And, as time goes on, this also can be quantified, definitely, and there's ongoing work to figure out how to quantify that and do an ever better job in quantifying sustainability issues for businesses. But that would be another sort of, after you've done your costs and benefits, then you look at all these other things. And then, of course, your last step, once you have laid out everything that is relevant among your different alternatives, is you go ahead and you make your decision. You look at all the relevant costs and benefits, including qualitative factors. And then on top of all that, you need to be sure to do the right thing ethically for your own peace of mind, as well as for the company's potential liability. And then you go ahead and you make the decision.